and I am delighted to have with us to help us continue this conversation about what to consider as you're looking at the operational aspects of this. We have two experts with us, Tom Clareson, the Project Director of Performing Arts Readiness, and Molly Quinlan Hayes of Arts Ready. She's the Director of the Arts Ready Project underneath South Arts, based in Atlanta. Tom, I'm going to have you start, and I know that you have done a lot of work to talk to organizations about a phased reopening process. And before you jump into that, I would really like you to talk a little bit about your super secret other life, which is as a board member for the Lancaster Chorale. And we really appreciate board members. You're doing God's work. How are things in Lancaster with the Lancaster Chorale? And tell us what's going on in your region.
Well, it's interesting. I'm based in the central Ohio area, and a lot of both vocal and arts organizations in the area constantly talking and trying to plan what's next. I am a board member with Lancaster Chorale, and that group had to cancel a late April concert. Also, my father-in-law is a member of the Lancaster Community Chorus, which is a large and growing organization that has huge crowds at its performances. They had to cancel a late March performance, and the thing that really concerns me the most, I think, was that both of those organizations in the past have performed at sort of an institution in central Ohio, the Lancaster Festival, which is a 10-day long festival that happens in mid-July. And just within the past 2 weeks, we heard that that has been canceled. And it's the first time, I believe, in 35 years that that's been canceled. It's a concern. We're seeing all types of festivals being canceled. So one of the things that we are seeing is what can people do alternatively, and what can they do to sort of plan during the time that they're down. And what I wanted to talk about briefly tonight was considering business continuity issues for your organizations, thinking about reopening and restarting from sort of the logistical point of view. And once we get the okay from the scientists, like those who are on our panel from the medical professionals, what can we do to stay ready and be ready to move forward? So I wanted to talk about that, but I also wanted to preface things just for a moment talking about the work that I've been doing in this area. It's part of a project called Performing Arts Readiness, as Catherine said. It's a project that's funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and we've been around since 2017, and we look to help performing arts organizations in a couple of different ways. Have them know how to protect their assets, have them know how to sustain operations in the long term, and be prepared for emergencies. And one of the things for this group that I wanted to mention is there are a lot of things that you can do after this session is over. We have a series of about 10, and we're going to add 2 more free webinars on a variety of topics, everything from risk assessment for your facilities, groups, etc., pandemic planning. We had debuted a session on that last week. Crisis communications, stress management, a number of other areas. And we hold these on about a monthly basis as live presentations, but we also have recordings of all of the presentations available so you can get to them 24/7, 365. So that's one activity where we have experts from all over the country, actually all over the world, who are talking about some of these issues. And the other thing that I really want to point people to is starting with our first grant and moving into this current grant that we have been re-granting to about 40 to 45 organizations each grant. Grants of $7,250, which can be used to bring in facilitators, consultants, others to help develop readiness plans. We had about 41 of those that were done in our last grant and have funding for 42. Our applications for those were just announced a week and a half ago. And so take a look on our website, which is performingartsreadiness.org, and take a look at those planning grant guidelines because we've had some interest in them, but we have not been flooded yet because people are looking at so many other issues with applications for them. So there is a time to get applications in. And because I know how popular and how large the crowds for some of your events can be, I want you to be able to make sure that your performers and artists are safe. So we talked about consideration of some of these issues, but I want to go a little bit further with a couple of sort of bullet points here. Will you consider testing ensemble members before practices? Should you develop a policy statement on the health of your performers and have them sign it? That's another thing we're hearing some groups considering. Will you place any age limits, upper and lower age limits on your audiences? We have not talked as much about audiences, but looking at that, people have been saying, should we do temperature checks on audience members when they come in? Will you require or at least suggest audience members to wear masks when attending performances? All of these are issues that I think should be considered. And one of the things that I know, I'm going to be on a board meeting tomorrow evening, a Zoom board meeting. And these are the kind of issues that we're going to be talking about, where we have board members and artist reps who will talk about this kind of thing. I know that getting back to practicing and performing is a concern, and with that in mind, something that's really important is to take a look at the federal and state policies and mandates. And certainly, large venues are told they can operate under strict physical distancing protocols in phase 1 of the president's Opening Up America Again policy, but from what I'm hearing and from what I know, many performing arts organizations are planning to wait until phase 3 when the distancing protocols are more limited. And these areas and discussions that I'm having are with people from the theater world, people from the concert production community for large scale concerts, and from the dance community as well. Many states, like my home state of Ohio, have very detailed and quite strict policies and timelines for opening. So I think consulting those resources are going to be important as well. And there's one group that not many of us had on our disaster plans, if we had those plans in the past, and that was making friends with and creating a relationship with your public health department, whether it's local public health or county public health department. And I would say, as we want to see where these trends are going, get in touch with those folks and work with them as you're trying to do your planning, and they'll be able to help you quite a bit with that. Some other policies for your organizations and performers to consider: if your organization doesn't have a disaster plan or a continuity of operation plans yet, now is the time to develop one. And Molly and I have a lot of samples that we can share and point you towards. You and your performers also should have family or personal disaster plans, and there are a ton of good resources available at ready.gov. In fact, way before the pandemic started, we have been pointing people towards some of the tools at ready.gov. The other thing is that we've seen with many choral groups and choruses, you have performers who are traveling in from other cities or other states and who will do performances with you. And you need to make sure, are they coming from an area where it's a hotspot? And will those people who are coming from areas that might be under some level of restrictions or under different state restrictions, how will you work with them? A few other policy areas, additional policies. One of the things that Catherine and Molly and I talked about in a preliminary call that we had was insurance issues. And I certainly am not going to say that there is a level of insurance issues that I know a ton about. But I think that if you can review your insurance policy soon and talk with your insurance agents or brokers about coverage and liabilities, that's going to be very important. If you don't have a lawyer or insurance person on your board of trustees yet, it's a good time to get one now to help with these discussions that are coming up. You may have an insurance policy renewal coming up, and what changes would you want to pursue in that? Couple of other paperwork areas you could consider updating: your financial plans, your performer contracts, performance and rehearsal site agreements, performance licenses, your public relations and marketing databases, and your patron database. And this ties into directly what Dr. Milton was talking about. Now is also a good time to find out about the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system in your performance area. How often are the systems cleaned? Do they bring in outside air? Finding all of those things are important as well. So there's some level of that building infrastructure and technology. One last thing I wanted to talk about before I pass things over to Molly. I know it's difficult to replace the sound of voices together in a live choir or chorus setting, but if we're looking at, as we've heard from the doctors, additional months, or what some experts say might be another 1 to 2 years of working with it in the sort of pandemic and social distancing environment, we need to consider how to keep our skills sharp, how to plan for virtual activities, and also ramp up for our reopening. So I think the idea of having performers practice by themselves the same amounts as they would normally practice is important. One thing that I've seen that's been incredible over the past week: can your performers start to learn or improve their technology skills that they already have? I recently saw the college senior daughter of one of our board members from the chorale, her first attempt at video multi-tracking, and it was amazing. She was doing Bill Withers' Lean on Me, so it was sort of heart-rending, but it was wonderful as well. And we're also seeing on a professional singer level, we're seeing some great creativity from performers like Dua Lipa and others who are doing virtual crowdsourcing for videos and performances. Can we look at 3 to 4 performers doing a small virtual performance together? Do you have inventory, recordings, CDs, T-shirts, programs that you can sell on your website at this time? And one other thing, and I'm not sure how this translates to the choral community as well, but I know in the singer-songwriter community in Ohio, they're developing a virtual tip jar. A virtual tip jar for being able to give tips to performers who are doing things in a virtual setting. So I think with those ideas in mind, I want to hand over the microphone to my colleague, Molly Quinlan Hayes, who has really great information on disaster preparedness planning and a number of other topics as well.
As was mentioned in the beginning, I'm Molly Quinlan Hayes. I manage the Arts Ready National Initiative out of South Arts in Atlanta. And we're here to make sure that every arts organization can have a readiness plan and have a plan B. So I'm going to really talk for a very quick, about 5 minutes from that perspective. There is a cycle of readiness, response, and recovery in disaster management circles, which is an actual thing. And most of today we've been talking about the response, recovery, and kind of restart. So I'm going to fill some concepts in about the readiness piece of the cycle, and then look at some ideas about our current situation. So most of what I'm going to talk about focuses on organizations rather than individual artists, but I think there's a lot of hopefully crossover information that y'all will find helpful. So what is readiness for arts and cultural organizations? We believe that it is having policies, processes, documents, and trainings and drills in place to keep your operations going, and building that concept into just your organizational DNA as part of your planning and strategizing and operations. Why is planning important? We don't make good decisions when we're panicked. Our cognitive level drops. So it's good when you can take some quiet space and mind space to be thinking about this. And I'll probably repeat a few of the ideas that Tom offered in terms of making the most use of this time. Why is planning important? Again, you need to think about all kinds of hazards. They're both human caused and natural or technological. So at Arts Ready, we recommend this particular framework for readiness planning, using an all hazards concept, which I'll define, and looking at all of your critical functions so that you have a plan B, a backup plan for each one of them. All hazards means that if your access to one of your resources or one of your critical business functions is cut off, you need to know how you're going to respond. In normal times, say if your accompanist couldn't come to rehearsal because they had a fever, or they eloped and went to Tahiti, or their basement just flooded and they have to deal with it, that doesn't matter. What it means is you can't get your accompanist to rehearsal. So how are you going to have a backup in place? And what are the critical functions of arts organizations? Well, over the last 10 years, a group of arts administrators, business continuity experts, and people from the cultural heritage sector have worked together to come up with what we believe are the 10 critical business functions that you need to be thinking about. Your people. These are artists, crew, administrators, audiences, volunteers, board members. Your programs, concerts, educational activities, competitions, special events, and fundraisers. Facilities, any spaces that you use for your administration, for ticket sales, for rehearsal, performances. Storage, preparation spaces. Your finances, which include, of course, insurance. Information technology. Communications. Collections and assets, which is a concept that a lot of performing arts organizations don't necessarily think about, but certainly your music library, your merchandise, all those kinds of things are assets and collections that you need to, any instruments that you own. Trainings and drills to make sure that people are regularly updated on what their role should be. And finally, community, which is really how do you work within your community of practice, of artistic practice, but also your geographical community. Tom mentioned being in touch with your public health office. You should also have a relationship with your local emergency management office. This crisis is different than most others because the threat is invisible and there's no sense of an end to it. Unlike a fire or a protest or a tornado, we just don't know when this is going to stop and we'll return to something like normal. So here are a couple of my personal tenets when I talk to people about readiness planning. The first one is no guilt. Start where you are. You've probably got some elements of a readiness plan already in place. You just need to consciously think about collecting those. If you haven't thought in this space very much or at all, that's fine. Both at performingartsreadiness.org and at artsready.org, we have a ton of resources in our library, in our planning tools, in our sample plans for you to look at how you might take some first easy steps to do that. What might be helpful in this particular moment related to what I've just described, one is communications protocol, making sure that you have the ability to be in touch quickly and clearly with everyone that you need to, your participants, your artists, your stakeholders. Make sure that's up to date. Now in March, I was on a few webinars very early in this, and at that point, my advice was you cannot over communicate. I'm kind of second guessing that now because we're all kind of being bombarded with information and this latest article and this study. And so you might want to be more of a gatekeeper now about your communication. But I think that still we need to be very transparent and clear when we communicate with people. And if we don't know the answers, there are a lot of questions we don't have answers to. We just need to honestly say, we don't know. This is where we are right now. The medical professionals talked a lot about these issues of privacy and sensitivity, so I'm going to skip over that. But you might want to think in terms of privacy and sensitivity, an idea of maybe a safety officer, an ombudsman. When we help organizations develop readiness plans for their organization, we say you need to have a response team and a team leader. It's not necessarily the executive director, but someone through whom all communication goes in and out. So one person has all the facts and can relay that to the right people. And so that is something that if you don't have one of those, you might want to, particularly as we start moving to the place where you're going to start gathering back together again in real life. I can imagine that if I were a member of a choir, I would have this incredible tension between, I love the group, I want to be with the group, they count on me, versus I'm anxious and I'm scared and I'm not sure if I want to go there. Again, no guilt, right? We all just have to be in that space where we are and honor that. But also in this, as we come back together, it also might be a good idea to have this neutral person who not only is overseeing the things we've talked about, whether it's the sanitizing the space, making sure that the screening is going on at the door, all of that, but also who can be the neutral communicator. If I were next to a friend, someone I cared about, but they are, not 6 feet away, or they are sneezing, I don't necessarily want to have to confront them and say, you should go home. But if you have a neutral person who's responsible for that activity, you can take any concerns to them and let them handle it. So it kind of keeps that spirit intact. Another obvious tenet in readiness planning is if you see something, say something. For instance, a backpack in the wings that just suddenly appeared and nobody knows who owns it. Or if you see a stack of chairs blocking the emergency exit, you want to tell somebody. Well, where we are now, again, if you see something, say something, hopefully again to some neutral person, but we need to take care of ourselves and always be, watchful and cautious. Readiness will mean, and readiness in general needs an investment of time and money, more time than money, actually. It's about making good decisions, as well as also, obviously getting some special equipment that you might need. You should already be investing in really good data backup and storage and security. You should have appropriate levels and types of insurance, as Tom said. Now you're going to have to think about budgeting for masks or sanitizer or tests or signage and floor markers for the space. I've seen all these commercial, Walmart, boy, they just, slapped them out there, but, it's harder for us, but we're going to have to find some resources to do that. One way might be to work collaboratively, and I'll get back to that one in just a moment. Someone mentioned Dr. Selig's piece, the paper from the San Francisco Gay Men's Course. If you haven't seen it, it's wonderful. It's very clear and has a lot of great tips. Also, think about how you might have to communicate if you use a shared space. Who else is going to be in that space? Who's going to be responsible for sanitizing it before and after? Do you have landlords or tenants that you need to be talking about a restart? Another thing that I've heard recently is the idea of don't make any big commitments now that, okay, we're going to do this and we're going to be ready so that in January we're going to be ready to go. We have no idea what is coming. So be nimble, start small, start, lower level kinds of stuff, test it out, because we might find that we have to put the brakes on it again, in the fall. Use this downtime to plan. I'm going to echo some of what Tom said. Put things in place. You could record interviews with some of your, longest standing members, put together some history with your artistic director. People love to see backstage things, so posting some of those online for your folks who can't attend your performances right now. Document historical events, build in redundancies and cross-training. It's so hard for those of us in the arts to cross-train, whether it's at a board level or a staff level. You can have one person describe their key jobs and those processes to another person. It's documented, and you've also got another trained person. So again, use this time by thinking of things that you would have to have put off in a regular time of rehearsal and performance. A quote I heard this morning was great, and it was, seek clarity, not certainty. We can't be certain, but if we get rid of the buzz and the anxiety and just kind of really seek clarity, I think that's a reasonable way to go about getting through this this particular time. And I'll go back to this issue of community and being kind of porous and collaborative. When Catherine invited Tom and I to speak, she said that it was the first time that the 4 hosts of this webinar have worked together. And what a great community. I think that there's a great benefit to doing that, whether it is working to buy signage in bulk, if all the arts organizations in your neck of the woods get together, or whether it is sharing artists or sharing information. This is a great time. People want to connect. And if you can't do it live in a room with your voice, there are a lot of other ways to be doing it.